Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I did a video a couple of days ago regarding this supposed Saudi takeover of boxing, which they're talking about doing a league or creating some sort of model that's similar to the UFC. And I basically said this would be absolutely appalling. It would be horrendous for boxing. And the reasons I gave were that it would take away all the power of boxers to negotiate. You need competition in business. You need a fighter saying, I'm aligned to this promoter. That promoter looks out for that fighter. Another promoter will have possibly an opponent or a rival, and they will negotiate the best deal for their fighters. And there's the build-up, and then you fight. It doesn't always happen, of course, because sometimes the matches don't get made up. I mean, Joshua Wilder was never made. Going back, another famous example is Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe never fighting in their professional careers, although they did fight in the final of the Olympics in 1988. But look, some people in the comments section said, I couldn't care less what fighters get paid. I think it's a brilliant idea having a UFC model in boxing. Because the best fight the best, and I think it'd be a great idea. Look, I don't agree at all. You can say you don't care about what fighters are getting paid. You only want to see good fights. None of my business what fighters are getting paid. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I personally want to see fighters, people who are putting their lives on the line, getting rewarded well. You can have it too much, like, for example, pay-per-view. I've never made any secret of the fact I don't buy pay-per-views. I watch them using other means, unashamedly so, unapologetically so, because I think that is exploiting the fans. I think that's squeezing the rag dry. I'm not going to give a single penny to someone who's already worth tens of millions of pounds. However, I do want to see fighters well paid. And I'm not just talking about the elite, that fraction of a percent at the top. I want to see fighters on small horse shows getting a decent amount of money, not just the journeymen who can earn maybe roughly $1,000 a fight and fight twice a month. I want to see people, British title fights, Commonwealth title fights. I want to see good money flying around, going right down to grassroots level, because the grassroots are where everything springs from. Now, even if you are of the opinion that you don't care about fighters, essentially you don't care about them, you don't give a damn about them, you don't care what about their families, whether they're paid or not, who cares? Even if that's your opinion, to say that the UFC model would be good for boxing is absolutely nonsensical. Because first of all, UFC isn't the whole of MMA. It's regarded as the sort of gold standard. Okay, look, let me be honest, I'm a pure casual when it comes to UFC. So you guys can contradict me all you like. I probably wouldn't I wouldn't be able to argue back at you. But it does seem to me that if you're not going to be part, or you refuse to be exploited or become part of that sort of under one roof cult, you're going to be out in the cold. And you might be a good fighter. You might be a very good fighter. You might be someone who could beat the guys who are in that one little cult. Kind of like PBC was. That's another example I used in my previous video. But you're not going to get a look in because you're not prepared to play ball. And we did have versions of this in boxing, going way back. Like there was talk about, one of Cus D'Amato's biggest achievements was what he did with Floyd Patterson, because he swerved the whole mob influence on boxing at the time and made Patterson into a heavyweight champion, a two-time undisputed heavyweight champion. And Patterson was never the greatest of the heavyweight champions. He was very small guy. He won the Olympic gold. Was it middleweight? I think he fought as an amateur. And he weighed sort of 187, something like that. Of course, he got wiped out twice by Sonny Liston and beaten up by Muhammad Ali and all the rest of it. And but the fact that D'Amato managed to swerve the mob and get sort of maximize Patterson's potential meant that he kind of broke the mold to some degree. It was a tremendous achievement, greater than the other fighter he's associated with, which is Mike Tyson, because he died. I think, was it before Tyson turned professional, just after? So yeah, there have been these, locked in models for boxing, just like UFC is. But there have always been fights on the outside looking in. Jake LaMotta was another one. He had to throw the Billy Fox fight supposedly to get the world title shot, and whether that was true or not, I don't know. But the point is there. The point is there to be made. Now, do we really want a model where people are frozen out unless they become part of the cult? I also mentioned previously in my video about Don King in the 80s with the heavyweights. He mopped up all the heavyweights. They were in one big camp. And there's that famous story about when Mike Tyson was coming up, King got all of the heavyweights in his stable, there were some considerable names there. I mean, the who's who of 1980s heavyweights, and said, there's this guy coming up called Mike Tyson. Prepare for him. And of course, we know what happened. Tyson cut a sway through the heavyweights and injected some much needed excitement back into that division. So occasionally you get outsiders in boxing who have broken the mold. Would that be allowed if you had the UFC style model in boxing? I just think the idea is no. I think the more powerful one entity becomes, the more difficult it is for people to break in. But the thing that really annoyed me about some of the comments, I mean, people are entitled to their opinions, don't get me wrong. I like reading your comments. But one thing that it doesn't annoy me, it just exasperates me a bit, is this myth. And I'm sad to say it comes from a lot of younger people to whom, 2010 is ancient history. This myth that UFC is somehow taken over from boxing, and boxing's dying and UFC is where it's at and it's leading the way, it's going to kill boxing. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. That is such a ridiculous belief to have. The kindest thing I can say to people who have that view is that they are ignorant. And they just don't realise what they're saying. They just don't realise about the history of boxing, don't realise about the history of UFC. Even I don't know much about the history of UFC, but I do know that it's been around. I do know it was founded about, 93, 92, 93, early 90s it was formed. So it's been around for 30 plus years. And when it has had the history of boxing, then maybe I'll listen to statements like that. But if you just look at boxing in one form or other goes back 3,600, 3,700 years. There's a Minoan fresco or mural of two guys in boxing pose that dated like 3,600, 3,700 years ago, like 1600, 1700 BC. And of course, people think it was the Greeks that a lot of people say, it's the Greeks that invented boxing as we know it. No, it goes back before the Greeks. If you just take the gloved era, the Queensberry Rules, even though they're called the Queensberry Rules, they were actually put together by a guy called John Chambers, who was I think he was a multi-sportsman at Cambridge University. He was big. He was a rowing champion. But he liked boxing. He put together, with some other people whose names escape me, he put together the Queensberry Rules. The Marquess of Queensberry kind of adopted them and put his seal of approval on them, which is why he gets the credit, but he shouldn't get the credit. John Chambers and a few other people were the ones that drew up the rules. And in fact, they drew them up in 1867. First heavyweight glove champ. Well, John L. Sullivan straddled the two, because before you had Marquess of Queensberry, you had London prize rules. He sort of straddled the two, doing this off memory, so let me think now. I think he was the first heavyweight era champion, Queensberry Rules champ. But the point I'm making is that just in its current that was, by the way, that would have been 1889, 1890, 92, something like that. So let's be generous, or let's give a conservative estimate and say that boxing in its current format has been around for 130 years. That's roughly, give or take. That's a century more than UFC has been around. And yet people say despite the fact boxing has gone through ups and downs, and you know, it survived the mob, it survived 2 world wars, it survived various scandals, and despite all of this stuff, people still say, oh, UFC is killing boxing. You what? Look, I'm not knocking UFC. They're incredibly brave guys. They're very, very courageous and so on and so forth. And they are, good luck to them. It's a tough sport. I could never do it. But UFC taking over from boxing, don't be ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous. Look beyond the last decade. This is the long game. This is the game that will, it'll last long after I'm in my pine box 6 foot under, and probably you as well. UFC, mixed martial arts will carry on, of course. It will grow, it will prosper, no doubt. But in terms of its universal appeal, no, boxing is where it's at, which is why I've always been fascinated by it, the history of it as well. So I reject this idea that UFC is a danger to boxing. The only thing that can destroy boxing is itself, which has come close to doing a few times historically. But even then, it's come back. So yeah, this is just really a follow-up video on the other video I did. And yeah, comments below if you've got any. If you want to make any other points, no problem. I'll have a listen. Yeah. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, hit the like button. And also, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, because it helps the channel spread the word about Joe Stunner Boxing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I always appreciate your time and your comments. I will give them a read. Thank you, and bye for now.